Please, spare anything you can. Even the smallest morsel would be a blessing." The desperate plea cut through the morning mist like a blade, freezing Elswyth's steps upon the cracked stone bridge. Her fingers tightened around the small bundle of cloth containing her last piece of hard bread, the only food that would pass her lips today. 17 winters had hardened her resolve, but not her heart. The morning fog still clung to the thatched roofs of Caerwyn, painting the humble village in ghostly silver. Elswyth had risen before dawn, her small mud and timber cottage cold and silent, save for the soft breathing of her younger siblings still curled beneath their threadbare blankets. Their hollow cheeks and dreaming faces had nearly broken her resolve to take the bread to market, hoping to trade it for thread or perhaps a sliver of cheese. The voice had come from beneath the bridge, where the river's edge formed a muddy haven for those with nowhere else to rest. Hesitantly, Elswyth peered over the moss-covered stones. There, huddled against the damp archway, sat a man in tattered garments that might once have been fine cloth. His beard, untamed and streaked with dirt, covered most of his face, but his eyes, blue as a summer sky yet clouded like melted ice, fixed upon her with a gaze that seemed to pierce her very soul. "Young maiden," he spoke again, his voice barely audible above the gentle rushing of the river. "Might you spare even the scent of your bread? It has been 3 days since—" Elswyth's stomach cramped painfully, reminding her of her own hunger. The daughter of a seamstress claimed by fever and a father who never returned from the salt mines, she had become the sole provider for her brothers and sister. With needle, thread, and whatever fate allowed, she kept them alive, barely. "I shouldn't," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Lady Maudlin had promised payment for mending her velvet gowns. If Elswyth could reach the castle before midday, the man lowered his eyes. "I understand, child. May your journey be blessed, nonetheless." Something in his dignity, in the way he accepted her refusal without bitterness, made Elswyth's throat tighten. Without another word, she knelt beside him, her worn leather boots sinking into the riverside mud. "It isn't much, but it's whole," she said, unwrapping the small loaf from its linen cloth. "Sharing would make me feel less alone." She placed the bread in his thin hands. For a moment, he simply stared at the offering as if it were a sacred chalice. His fingers, long and surprisingly clean beneath the grime, trembled slightly. "Why?" he asked, not taking his eyes from the bread. Elswyth shrugged, adjusting the leather strips wrapped around her palms to hide her calluses. "Because I thought no one else would." He looked up then, and Elswyth caught a flash of something in his eyes. Intelligence, perhaps, or sadness far deeper than mere hunger could explain. "What is your name, child?" he asked. "Elswyth of Caerwyn," she replied, rising to her feet, though names matter little when stomachs growl equally. A faint smile touched his cracked lips. "Names always matter, Elswyth of Caerwyn, as do choices." She nodded uncertainly and turned to leave, her errand now more urgent with empty hands. The castle seamstresses would mock her again, a peasant girl who thought her stitches fine enough for nobility. But Lady Maudlin's silver would feed her family for a fortnight. "May we meet again, Elswyth," the beggar called after her. "In better circumstances for us both," she replied without looking back, unaware that this simple choice would alter not only her fate, but that of the entire kingdom. The marketplace of Dornevale bustled despite the early hour. Merchants shouted their wares, children darted between carts, and the smell of freshly baked bread from the castle kitchens made Elswyth's hunger sharpen painfully. She had nearly reached the western gate when horns blared from the castle towers. Royal messengers on horseback burst into the square, their mounts' hooves clattering on cobblestones. People scattered, pressing against walls and stalls as the riders circled the market center, unfurling banners bearing the royal crest. A falcon with wings spread over a golden field. "Hear the decree of His Majesty," shouted the lead herald, his voice booming across the suddenly silent square. "Duke Cedric of Arundel, heir to the eastern provinces and royal counselor, has not been slain as rumored." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. For 3 seasons, the Duke's absence had fueled countless tavern tales, that he'd been murdered by jealous courtiers, that he'd fled with a common lover, that he'd been transformed into a falcon by a scorned witch. "The noble Duke has walked among you in disguise," continued the herald, "seeking true virtue among the common folk, weary of false smiles and hollow flattery at court." Laughter erupted from a group of minor nobles near the wine merchant's stall. "He's not dead, you fools!" the herald snapped. He walks among us wearing rags." Elswyth barely heard the rest of the proclamation. Her mind returned to the beggar beneath the bridge, to his clean hands and intelligent eyes, to the way he'd held the bread, as if it were precious beyond measure. Surely not. It couldn't be. Those who have shown kindness to strangers in recent days are commanded to present themselves at the castle gates tomorrow at midday, the herald concluded. By order of the king. As the messengers departed and the market resumed its chaotic dance, Elswyth stood frozen, the weight of possibility settling over her like a cloak of lead. She had given away her last morsel of food to a beggar who might have been the Duke of Arundel. Or perhaps it was merely coincidence. After all, what would a duke want with a seamstress who could barely feed her siblings? With a deep breath, she straightened her patched woolen dress and continued toward the castle, unaware that her simple act of kindness had already set wheels in motion that would transform her life forever. And with it, the fate of Dornevale itself. The castle servant's entrance loomed before Elswyth like the maw of some great stone beast. Never before had she passed through the kitchens with such trepidation. Usually she came bearing mended garments or to collect torn ones, slipping in and out like a shadow. Today, summoned by royal decree, she stood paralyzed with uncertainty. "Move aside, girl," huffed a portly baker, pushing past with a tray of steaming loaves. "The nobles won't wait for their bread, and they certainly won't wait for you." Elswyth's siblings had begged her not to go. Little Edith had clung to her skirts, certain the king would have her head for some imagined offense. Wulfric, though only 10 winters old, had offered to accompany her with his whittled wooden sword. But there was no choice. Royal summons were not requests. She had spent the night mending her best dress, a faded blue wool that had once belonged to her mother. The garment was plain but clean, with careful stitching at the hem and collar. Her hair, normally tied back with twine while she worked, she had arranged in a simple braid, adorned with the only treasure she possessed, a small silver pin her father had given her mother upon their wedding day. Taking a deep breath, Elswyth stepped into the kitchens. The usual chaos, servants rushing, cooks shouting, pots clanging, seemed magnified tenfold. No one spared her a glance as she followed the stream of people toward the great hall. "You there! The girl in blue!" A stern voice cut through the din. Elswyth turned to see a castle steward, his velvet doublet embroidered with the royal crest, regarding her with impatience. "Are you Elswyth of Caerwyn?" She nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "This way." He gestured sharply. "You're to present yourself in the throne room, not the servants' hall." Her heart hammered against her ribs as she followed him up a winding staircase she had never been permitted to use. With each step, the sounds of the kitchen faded, replaced by the hushed whispers and soft footfalls of the nobility. They passed tapestries depicting great battles and hunts, their rich colors making Elswyth's homespun dress seem all the more drab. "Wait here," the steward commanded when they reached a set of ornate doors inlaid with gold. "Enter only when announced." Left alone in the corridor, Elswyth fought the urge to flee. What if the beggar had been the duke? What if he had been offended by her simple offering? What if this was all some cruel jest? The doors swung open, revealing a cavernous hall filled with the kingdom's elite. Silks and velvets in jewel tones, gleaming armor, flashing jewels. The display of wealth was dizzying. Courtiers turned to stare as a herald's voice rang out. "Presenting Mistress Elswyth of Caerwyn." 100 pairs of eyes fixed upon her as she stepped forward, her calloused feet whispering against the polished marble floor. The silence was deafening, broken only by occasional titters and whispers. "She's a seamstress for pigs. How dare she tread upon the king's marble?" Lady Maudlin hissed from behind a velvet fan, her voice deliberately loud enough for Elswyth to hear. "Did she mistake this for the servants' entrance?" Another noblewoman replied with a cruel laugh. Elswyth kept her gaze fixed on the gleaming floor, her cheeks burning. She had never felt the gulf between commoner and noble so acutely as in this moment, surrounded by those who viewed her presence as an offense. "Approach the throne, child," commanded a deep voice. Elswyth raised her eyes to see King Edwin of Dornevale seated upon his golden throne. Despite his advanced years, he sat straight-backed, his silver-streaked beard reaching nearly to his waist. Beside him stood a figure that made Elswyth's breath catch in her throat. Gone were the ragged clothes and unkempt beard. In their place stood a man in a rich blue tunic embroidered with silver thread, a circlet of polished silver resting upon his dark hair. But the eyes, those same ice-blue eyes, were unmistakable. The Duke of Arundel, the beggar beneath the bridge. "Your Majesty," Elswyth whispered, dropping into an awkward curtsy, her knees threatening to buckle beneath her. "Look at me, child," the king said, his voice gentler than she had expected. Elswyth forced herself to raise her gaze. The king was studying her with curious eyes, as if trying to solve some puzzle. "My nephew tells me you gave him your last piece of bread," he said. "Is this true?" I did not know he was the Duke, Your Majesty," she stammered. "He appeared to be a beggar in need." "And would you have given your bread had you known his true identity?" Elswyth hesitated, sensing a trap in the question. "I cannot say, Your Majesty. I have never before met a duke, disguised or otherwise." A ripple of laughter spread through the court, quickly silenced by the king's raised hand. "An honest answer," he nodded. "But tell me this. Why give away your last morsel? Surely your own hunger mattered." "It mattered, Your Majesty," Elswyth replied, finding courage in the truth. "But his seemed greater than mine, and I have known hunger long enough to recognize its depths in another's eyes." The Duke, Cedric, stepped forward then, his gaze never leaving her face. "You said something to me," he spoke, his voice clear and commanding in the vast hall. "You said sharing would make you feel less alone. Why?" Elswyth's hands twisted in her faded skirts. "My lord, when you have little, sharing what little you have creates something, a bond, a moment where poverty doesn't define everything. My mother taught me that generosity isn't measured by how much you give, but by how much you keep." Duke Cedric turned to the assembled courtiers. "I walked among you for 3 seasons. I begged at your doors. I slept in your stables. I asked for crusts from your tables." His voice grew harder with each word. "The wealthy merchants turned their dogs upon me. The minor nobility had me thrown into ditches. Even the clergy," he cast a pointed look at the royal chaplain, "told me that my suffering was God's punishment for my sins." He gestured toward Elswyth. "Yet this girl, who has nothing, who bears the weight of feeding her siblings on her slender shoulders, shared her last piece of bread with a stranger, asking nothing in return." Sir Godric, the king's treasurer, stepped forward with a scowl. "Giving bread doesn't make her worthy of royal attention, Your Majesty. The girl can barely sign her name, I'd wager. And what honor is there?" Cedric countered, his gaze piercing the older man. "In writing verses while failing to recognize hunger in a man's eyes?" The treasurer's face flushed crimson. "We cannot elevate every peasant who performs a small kindness. What next? Shall we make shepherds into lords for sharing their water?" King Edwin raised a hand for silence. "The question is not what title we shall bestow, but what lesson we shall learn." He turned to Elswyth. "Child, do you seek reward for your kindness?" Elswyth shook her head. "No, Your Majesty. I only seek permission to return home. My siblings will worry if I'm gone too long." The king exchanged a glance with his nephew. "A modest request, easily granted. But first you will dine with us tonight." Lady Maudlin stepped forward, her silk skirts rustling. "Your Majesty, surely you don't mean to seat her at the royal table? A common seamstress?" The king's eyes hardened. "I mean precisely that, Lady Maudlin, and I expect every courtesy to be shown to our guest." As the court erupted in whispers, Duke Cedric approached Elswyth and offered his arm. "Come," he said quietly. "Let us escape these wolves for a moment. There is something I wish to show you." Terrified yet unable to refuse, Elswyth placed her trembling hand upon the Duke's sleeve, aware of the hundreds of shocked and envious stares following them as they left the great hall. With each step beside nobility, she felt further from the world she had always known, and closer to a future she could never have imagined. The royal gardens sprawled before them, a carefully cultivated paradise rarely glimpsed by common folk. Autumn had turned the leaves to gold and crimson, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across stone pathways. Elswyth walked silently beside Duke Cedric, acutely aware of the guards following at a discreet distance. "You're very quiet," the Duke observed, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. "I fear any word I speak will be the wrong one, my lord," Elswyth admitted. A faint smile touched his lips. "Yet beneath the bridge, you spoke freely enough. Beneath the bridge, you were a beggar like me. Now you are what you truly are." They reached a stone bench overlooking a small pond, where swans glided across the mirrored surface. The Duke gestured for her to sit, then dismissed the guards with a wave of his hand. "What I truly am," he said, remaining standing, "is a man who has seen both sides of the world now. The side where every door opens at your approach, and the side where every door slams shut." He turned to face her, his expression solemn. "Do you know why I left the castle, Elswyth?" She shook her head. "My father died when I was 7. The king, my uncle, raised me as his own son. I've never known hunger or cold or fear, until these past months." He paced before her, hands clasped behind his back. "I was to be married to the daughter of the Duke of Westmorley. A political alliance. Nothing more. A common arrangement among nobility," Elswyth murmured. "Indeed. But a week before the betrothal feast, I overheard my bride-to-be speaking with her handmaiden. She said she cared not what kind of man I was, only that I would one day wear the crown." His jaw tightened. "She laughed about how she would tolerate my presence to secure her position, then take lovers once she became queen." Elswyth remained silent, uncertain how to respond to such a confession. "It struck me then," he continued, "that I would never know if anyone's kindness toward me was genuine or merely a means to gain favor. So I disappeared, took nothing but a knife and the clothes on my back, became no one." He sat beside her on the bench, close enough that Elswyth could smell the subtle scent of sandalwood that clung to his fine garments. "For 3 seasons, I learned what it truly means to be invisible, to have nobles look through you as if you were made of air, to have merchants chase you from their doorways lest you frighten customers with your poverty, to sleep in rain and snow because no inn would shelter you without coin." His voice had grown quiet, intense. "I learned more about ruling in those months than in all my years at court." A swan approached the bank, its elegant neck arched expectantly. "Why are you telling me this, my lord?" Elswyth asked. "Because tonight, you will dine with people who believe your presence soils their air. I would have you understand that their contempt says more about them than it does about you." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from the castle. Servants came running through the gardens, their faces tight with alarm. "Your Grace," called a breathless page. "Come quickly. A rider from the coastal villages." Cedric was on his feet in an instant. "What news?" "Sickness, Your Grace. A terrible sickness spreading through the villages. Dozens already dead, and more falling ill by the hour." Elswyth felt her blood run cold. The coastal villages lay between Dornavale and Caerwyn, between her and her siblings. "My family," she whispered, rising from the bench. "I must return home." The Duke turned to her, conflict evident in his expression. "The roads may not be safe. If this sickness is spreading, they are all I have, my lord. I cannot abandon them." He nodded grimly. "Then I shall send riders with you. But first, we must hear the messenger's full report." They hurried back to the castle, where chaos had erupted in the great hall. The court physician was interrogating a haggard rider while the king and his advisors looked on with grave expressions. "The symptoms begin with a fever," the messenger was saying, his voice hoarse. "Then a rash across the chest and back. By nightfall, the victims cannot breathe. By morning, most are dead." "How does it spread?" demanded the physician. "We know not, my lord. It takes the young and old alike, the strong and the weak." Elswyth approached slowly, a terrible suspicion forming in her mind. "The rash," she said, her voice barely audible. "Is it crimson, like wine stains on linen?" All eyes turned to her. The court physician scowled at her intrusion, but the messenger nodded eagerly. "Yes, exactly so. And the fever makes them cry out with dreams of fire beneath their skin." Sir Godric stepped forward, his expression thunderous. "How dare you interrupt, girl? Return to your place." But Duke Cedric raised a hand. "Let her speak." Elswyth swallowed hard. "My mother was a seamstress, but she also gathered herbs and made remedies. Before she died, she treated an outbreak in our village with similar symptoms." The physician snorted. "A village woman's folk remedies have no place in royal council. This requires proper medical knowledge." "And what is your diagnosis, master physician?" the king asked. The elderly man stroked his beard. "A corruption of the blood, your majesty. We must bleed the victims to release the poison and apply hot compresses to draw out the evil humors." Elswyth's hands clenched at her sides. "No," she whispered. "Speak up, child," the king commanded. She raised her chin, though her voice trembled. "Bloodletting will kill them faster, your majesty. This sounds like the crimson fever. It comes from tainted water, often after heavy rains flood the lowland wells. My mother used a poultice of willow bark, garlic, and dandelion root to break the fever, and a tincture of belladonna leaf, just a drop, for its poison in larger amounts, to ease the breathing." The physician laughed outright. "Belladonna? You would poison the already sick? This girl is either a fool or a witch. Duke Cedric stepped forward. My uncle's royal hounds were struck with a similar fever last autumn. Your bloodletting killed half the pack before a kennel boy saved the rest with herbs. Perhaps we should consider other methods. The physician's face flushed with anger. Your Grace, you cannot possibly suggest we follow the advice of a common seamstress over a trained physician. The king raised his hand for silence. The coastal villages fall under my nephew's domain. The decision is his. All eyes turned to Cedric, who studied Elswyth intently. You are certain of this treatment? I have seen it work, my lord. But we must act quickly, and I need to return to my siblings. For a long moment, the Duke was silent, weighing lives against protocol, tradition against innovation. Finally, he nodded. Prepare the royal carriages. We ride for the coast within the hour. Bring the royal physician. He raised his voice as the older man began to protest. And Mistress Elswyth, we shall try both methods and see which bears fruit. Sir Godric stepped forward. Your Grace, to elevate a peasant girl's folk remedies above proper medicine is madness. And to bring her in a royal carriage. Enough! Cedric's voice rang through the hall. While we stand here debating propriety, people are dying. Would you have me ignore potential aid because it comes from common hands? At least change her clothes, Lady Maudlin sneered. If she's to ride in a royal carriage, she should not look like she crawled from a ditch. Elswyth felt her cheeks burn with shame, but the Duke merely smiled coldly. An excellent suggestion, Lady Maudlin. Perhaps you might lend Mistress Elswyth one of your simpler gowns. After all, she has mended enough of them to know their worth. The noblewoman blanched, then turned away without reply. An hour later, Elswyth found herself seated in a royal carriage opposite Duke Cedric, wearing a borrowed gown of deep green wool, not from Lady Maudlin, but from one of the king's younger cousins. The fabric was finer than any she had ever worn, the stitching so delicate she marveled at the craftsmanship. We will stop at Caerwyn first, the Duke said as the carriage lurched into motion, to check on your family and bring them to safety if needed. Elswyth's eyes widened in surprise. Thank you, my lord. Don't thank me yet, he replied grimly. If this sickness is as bad as reported, we ride into grave danger. Your herbs may be our only hope, or they may fail us entirely. As the carriage passed through the castle gates and onto the King's Road, Elswyth gazed out at the darkening landscape. Yesterday, she had been a simple seamstress with barely enough bread to feed her family. Today, she rode beside a duke, carrying the weight of countless lives on her slender shoulders. And if she failed, if her mother's remedies proved ineffective against this outbreak, she would be branded a fool, or worse. The physician would see her punished, the court would mock her presumption, and those already ill would perish regardless. The stakes could not be higher, nor the distance between her old life and her present circumstance more vast. Yet as the villages of Dornavale gave way to open countryside, Elswyth found herself remembering her mother's steady hands, crushing herbs in their small cottage. If nothing else, she would honor that legacy today. Tell me more about these herbs, the Duke said, breaking into her thoughts. How do we find them? How are they prepared? And so, as the royal carriage sped toward an uncertain fate, Elswyth began to explain, her voice growing steadier with each word. For the first time since entering the castle, she spoke with authority, not as a peasant girl out of place, but as her mother's daughter, keeper of knowledge that no royal education could provide. Dawn broke over the coastal village of Hemmingford, painting the sky in shades of blood and flame. The royal caravan had traveled through the night, stopping only briefly at Caerwyn, where Elswyth had found her siblings safe, but frightened. The Duke had stationed guards at their cottage with strict orders that no one was to enter or leave until their return. Now, as Elswyth stepped from the carriage, the true extent of the calamity became clear. Homes stood empty, doors ajar. Those few villagers still healthy enough to stand watched the royal procession with hollow eyes, hope and suspicion warring on their gaunt faces. How many? Duke Cedric asked the village elder, a weathered man whose hands trembled as he bowed. 23 dead, your grace. 45 sick and fading, mostly children and the elderly. Elswyth felt the weight of eyes upon her as she followed the Duke toward the village hall, now converted to a makeshift infirmary. The royal physician walked ahead, his spine rigid with indignation that a common girl had been granted equal standing in this grave mission. The stench hit them first, sweat and sickness and despair mingling in the close air. Inside, pallets covered the floor, each bearing a victim of the mysterious fever. Mothers cradled moaning children. Old men gasped for breath. A young woman, barely older than Elswyth herself, thrashed against restraints, her delirious cries piercing the gloomy atmosphere. "The rash," Elswyth whispered, kneeling beside a small boy whose chest bloomed with crimson stains. Just as my mother described, the royal physician sniffed dismissively. "A common blood corruption. We shall begin bleeding immediately, starting with the strongest patients." Duke Cedric turned to the village elder. "We will need 2 separate chambers. The physician will treat half the afflicted his way. Mistress Elswyth will treat the other half with her herbal remedies." The elder's eyes widened. "Begging your pardon, your grace, but the girl looks barely old enough to tend sheep, let alone the sick." "Nevertheless," the Duke replied firmly, "she will be given equal opportunity to prove her methods." While the villagers arranged the division, Elswyth approached one of the royal guards. "I need willow bark, fresh if possible, dandelion root, garlic, and belladonna. It grows near water, with purple bell-shaped flowers." The guard looked to the Duke, who nodded. "Take 4 men and find what she requires, quickly. And clean water," Elswyth added. "Boiled for at least the count of 100, then cooled. From a spring, not the village well." As the guards departed, the royal physician approached, his face flushed with anger. "This is absurd, your grace. While we waste time with this girl's folk remedies, people are dying." "Then I suggest you begin your treatments, Master Physician," the Duke replied coolly, "so we may see which method bears fruit." The physician stormed away, calling for his instruments to be brought from the carriage. Duke Cedric turned to Elswyth, his voice low. "You understand what happens if you fail?" She nodded, swallowing hard. "And if I succeed?" A flicker of something, amusement perhaps or respect, crossed his face. "Then I suspect the royal physician will never forgive you." By midday, both treatments were underway. In one chamber, the physician bled patient after patient, applying hot compresses and administering potions of his own concoction. In the other, Elswyth worked tirelessly, crushing herbs, brewing tinctures, and applying poultices to feverish bodies. The village women, initially skeptical of her youth, soon rallied to her side. They followed her instructions without question, their desperate hope overriding any doubt about her common origins. "My grandmother used similar remedies," confided an elderly woman as she helped Elswyth prepare another poultice. "Before the church called her methods witchcraft and burned her herbs." Elswyth glanced up sharply. "This is not witchcraft. It is knowledge passed from mother to daughter. Knowledge is power," the woman replied softly. "And power, in a woman's hands, frightens men who believe it belongs solely to them." As afternoon stretched into evening, the first signs of change appeared. In the physician's chamber, 2 more patients had died, while the rest showed little improvement. In Elswyth's care, the fevers had begun to break, and the youngest children were sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. Duke Cedric moved between the chambers, his face betraying nothing as he observed both methods. The royal physician grew increasingly agitated, insisting that more aggressive bleeding was necessary. "The sickness clings stubbornly," he declared. "We must draw more blood to remove the corruption." "Master Wilhelm," the Duke replied, using the physician's name for the first time, "your patients weaken while the girls grow stronger. Perhaps it is time to reconsider your approach." The physician's face darkened. "I have treated kings and princes for 30 years. I will not be undermined by a peasant girl with hedge witch knowledge." "Then prove your methods superior," Cedric challenged. "For I judge results, not pedigrees." As night fell, Elswyth sat beside the pallet of the young woman who had been thrashing in delirium that morning. Now she slept, her breathing even, the angry rash already fading from her chest. "How did you know?" Duke Cedric asked, appearing silently beside her. Elswyth started, then composed herself. "My mother said fever is the body's way of fighting invaders. Too much fever kills, but some is necessary. The belladonna eases the breathing, while the willow bark reduces the fever just enough to make it bearable. And the tainted wells. After heavy rains, water from the lowlands seeps into the wells. It carries something, my mother never knew what. But she observed that sickness followed the floods, and those who drank from springs instead of wells remained healthy." The Duke studied her thoughtfully. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Elswyth replied, a lump forming in her throat. "The fever that took her came too quickly for her own remedies to help. A commotion from the other chamber interrupted their conversation. The royal physician burst in, his robes askew, his face contorted with rage. "Witchcraft," he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at Elswyth. "This girl has bewitched the patients. 3 more of mine have died while hers improved miraculously." The Duke rose to his full height. "Control yourself, Master Wilhelm." "I will not. She has made a mockery of proper medicine. Her potions and charms are working," Cedric interrupted coldly. "While your methods fail." The physician's voice dropped to a hiss. "The king will hear of this. Elevating a common girl above his trusted physician? The court will whisper that she has bewitched you as well, your grace." "Let them whisper," the Duke replied. "I care more for these people's lives than court gossip." "You forget yourself," the physician warned. "A future king cannot be seen favoring peasant remedies over learned medicine. It undermines the natural order." For a moment, Elswyth thought the Duke might strike the man. Instead, he spoke with deadly calm. "The natural order, Master Wilhelm, is that those who heal are valued above those who harm. Leave this chamber and tend to your remaining patients with Mistress Elswyth's methods, or pack your instruments and return to court in disgrace." The physician's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Without another word, he stormed from the chamber. "He will make trouble," Elswyth said quietly. "Undoubtedly," the Duke agreed, "but trouble often reveals truth that comfort conceals." By morning, the transformation was undeniable. Those treated with Elswyth's remedies sat up, took broth, even walked short distances. In contrast, the physician's patients, now also receiving the herbal treatments, improved more slowly, weakened by blood loss. The village elder knelt before Duke Cedric as he prepared to depart. "Your Grace, we owe you and the girl our lives. How can we repay such mercy?" "Clean your wells," the Duke replied. "Build them higher to prevent floodwater from seeping in. And remember that wisdom sometimes comes from unexpected sources." As the royal carriage departed Hemmingford, Elswyth gazed back at the village where her mother's knowledge had saved so many. The physician had indeed left during the night, presumably to carry tales back to court. What awaited her there she could only imagine. "You're worried," the Duke observed as the carriage rumbled along the coastal road. "The physician will poison the court against me," she replied, "and I must return to my siblings, to my sewing." "Do you wish to?" The question caught her off guard. "My lord?" Duke Cedric leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Your knowledge is valuable, Elswyth. More valuable than fine stitches on a noblewoman's gown. The kingdom needs healers who understand the remedies you use today. I am not learned, my lord. I cannot read Latin texts or debate with scholars. Yet you saved lives when a learned man could not." He hesitated, then continued. "I would offer you a position at court. Royal herbalist, perhaps, with chambers for your siblings as well." Elswyth's heart raced at the prospect. A position at court would mean security for her family, a chance to practice her mother's healing arts openly, to learn more. "The nobles would never accept it," she said finally. "Some wouldn't," he agreed. "Others might surprise you. And those who matter most will judge you by your works, not your origins." As the carriage crested a hill, Dornevale Castle came into view, its stone towers gleaming in the afternoon sun. Somewhere within those walls, the royal physician was surely spinning tales of witchcraft and impropriety. Somewhere in those courtyards, nobles who had sneered at her presence would be plotting to remove the peasant girl who had caught the Duke's attention. And yet, for the first time since entering that world of privilege and protocol, Elswyth felt something like confidence stirring within her breast. She had faced a test and passed it. She had saved lives when others could not. Whatever awaited her at court, scorn, challenge, or grudging acceptance, she would face it with the quiet dignity that had carried her through years of hardship, not as a seamstress playing at nobility, but as her mother's daughter, keeper of knowledge too valuable to be lost to pride or prejudice. "I accept your offer, your grace," she said at last. "On one condition." The Duke raised an eyebrow. "And that is?" "That I may continue to sew." A small smile touched her lips. For not everyone at court knows how to mend a proper hem. Winter descended upon Dornevale with icy fingers, transforming the castle gardens into a crystalline wonderland, and freezing the moat into a smooth mirror. 3 months had passed since Elswyth's triumph in Hemmingford, 3 months of whispers and challenges and small victories. The chambers allocated to her and her siblings overlooked the eastern courtyard, not the grandest view, but far beyond anything they had known in Caerwyn. Little Edith delighted in watching the knights train below, while Wulfric had been taken as a page to an aging but kindly knight. Even Elswyth's youngest brother Thomas had found purpose helping in the castle mews, his gentle way with birds earning him the falconer's approval. As for Elswyth herself, her position as royal herbalist had proven both blessing and burden. The king had formalized her appointment with a ceremony that left her trembling but proud, presenting her with a silver medallion shaped like a budding wheat stalk, the symbol of simple life that nourishes kings. The royal physician had not returned to court, instead accepting a position with a distant lord known for his conservative views. Yet for every ally she gained, an enemy seemed to emerge from the shadows. Lady Maudlin led a faction of nobles who refused to consult Elswyth for their ailments, preferring to suffer rather than accept help from common hands. Sir Godric continued to object to her presence at council meetings, even when the discussion centered on public health. Herbs and tinctures in the servants' quarters, perhaps, he had sneered during one such gathering. But at the king's table, what next? Shall we invite the stable boys to advise on matters of state? Through it all, Duke Cedric had remained her steadfast defender, though his duties often took him from the castle. The coastal villages had adopted Elswyth's well-designs, and no further outbreaks of the crimson fever had occurred. This success only fueled her detractors' resentment. On this particular morning, Elswyth worked alone in her herb room, a small chamber adjacent to her living quarters. Bundles of dried plants hung from the rafters, chamomile, lavender, sage, and dozens more. Shelves lined the walls, laden with jars of tinctures and salves, each carefully labeled in her improving script. A castle scribe had been teaching her letters, and she had proven an apt pupil. A sharp knock interrupted her work-grinding willow bark. She opened the door to find a royal page, his expression urgent. "Mistress Elswyth, your presence is required in the great hall immediately." Her heart sank. Such summons rarely brought good news. "What has happened?" "I am not at liberty to say. Please come quickly." She wiped her hands on her apron. Not the rough wool of her seamstress days, but fine linen embroidered with healing herbs. Her gown, too, spoke of her changed circumstances. Deep blue wool with subtle silver stitching at the cuffs and collar. Still simple compared to court fashion, but of quality that would have been unimaginable in her previous life. The great hall hummed with tension as Elswyth entered. The court had assembled in full, with the king upon his throne and Duke Cedric standing grave-faced beside him. At the center of the hall stood Sir Godric and Lady Maudlin, both wearing expressions of barely concealed triumph. Between them, trembling visibly, stood Elswyth's brother Wulfric. "Ah, the herbalist arrives," Sir Godric announced. "Perhaps now we may proceed with this unpleasant business." The king beckoned Elswyth forward. "Mistress Elswyth, serious accusations have been brought against your brother. It seems he was discovered in Lady Maudlin's chambers this morning." Elswyth's blood ran cold. She looked to Wulfric, whose face was pale with terror. At 10 years old, he was still more boy than youth, gangly and perpetually disheveled despite his page's uniform. "What was he doing there?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Lady Maudlin stepped forward, her silk skirts rustling. "Stealing, of course. He was caught red-handed with my silver hairbrush." Murmurs rippled through the assembled courtiers. Theft from nobility was a serious offense, punishable by flogging or worse. "Wulfric," Elswyth said softly, "is this true?" The boy's lower lip trembled. "I didn't steal anything, Elsa. Sir Roderick sent me with a message for Lady Maudlin's maid about tonight's feast. The door was open and I waited, and then she came in and started screaming about her brush." Sir Godric snorted. "A convenient tale." The boy was found with the brush in his hands. "It was on the floor," Wulfric protested, tears welling in his eyes. "I picked it up to put it back on the table." Duke Cedric stepped forward. "Where is Sir Roderick now?" "Hunting with the Eastern Lords," a voice called from the crowd. "He left at dawn." The Duke frowned. "And the lady's maid? What does she say of this message?" Lady Maudlin's cheeks flushed slightly. "My Genevieve is indisposed this morning, but that hardly matters. The boy was caught with my property in his hands." King Edwin stroked his beard thoughtfully. "This is troubling indeed, without witnesses to support either account." "There is a simple solution," Sir Godric interjected smoothly. "The boy's sister has risen far beyond her station through unusual circumstances. Perhaps it is time to reconsider the wisdom of elevating those of common birth to positions of influence. Send them back to their village, where they belong." Elswyth felt the weight of every gaze in the hall. This had never been about Wulfric or a silver brush. This was the culmination of months of resentment, a carefully orchestrated attempt to remove her from court. "If I may speak, Your Majesty," she said, stepping forward. The king nodded. "You may. My brother is many things, sometimes careless, often too curious for his own good, but he is not a thief." She straightened her shoulders, facing Lady Maudlin directly. "I have known hunger that would tempt the most honest soul to steal. Wulfric has not. He has food, shelter, and purpose here. What need would he have of a silver hairbrush?" Lady Maudlin's eyes narrowed. "Are you calling me a liar, girl?" "I am suggesting," Elswyth replied carefully, "that there may be a misunderstanding. Perhaps if we examine the brush itself—" "An excellent suggestion," Duke Cedric interrupted. "Lady Maudlin, might we see this brush?" The noblewoman hesitated, then gestured to a waiting servant who stepped forward with a silver-handled brush on a velvet cushion. The Duke took it, examining it closely. "Interesting," he murmured. "Lady Maudlin, this brush bears the crest of House Trevelyan, not your own family's emblem." A hush fell over the hall. Lady Maudlin's face drained of color. It was a gift," she stammered. "From Lord Trevelyan?" the Duke pressed. "How curious, as Lady Trevelyan reported a silver brush missing after the Yule feast. She was most distressed, as it was a wedding gift from her mother." Sir Godric stepped forward hastily. "This is irrelevant. The boy was found with stolen property, regardless of its origin." "Not irrelevant at all," the Duke countered, "for it raises the question of who is truly the thief in this matter." The king raised his hand for silence. "Enough. Lady Maudlin, you will return the brush to Lady Trevelyan with appropriate apologies. As for the boy," he turned to Wulfric, his expression softening, "you are cleared of all accusations. Return to your duties." Relief flooded Elswyth's body, leaving her lightheaded. Wulfric ran to her side and she placed a protective arm around his shoulders. "And what of the girl?" Sir Godric demanded, his face flushed with thwarted rage. "Are we to pretend this incident never happened? That her family's character has not been called into question?" Duke Cedric stepped down from the dais, positioning himself between Elswyth and her accusers. "Her family's character has indeed been revealed today, Sir Godric. It has shown itself to be honest in the face of false accusations, dignified under scrutiny, and innocent of the petty machinations that apparently occupy others at court." The treasurer's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before he managed to sputter. "Your Grace forgets himself. This unseemly defense of a common girl will not be forgotten when the succession is decided." A dangerous silence fell over the hall. To threaten the king's heir, even obliquely, bordered on treason. King Edwin rose slowly from his throne, his aged face hardening with rare anger. "Be careful, Sir Godric. Very careful. My nephew's judgment in this matter aligns perfectly with my own. Perhaps it is you who forget yourself." The treasurer blanched, bowing low. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I spoke in haste." "Indeed." The king surveyed the assembled court. "Let this be the end of such baseless accusations. Mistress Elswyth has proven her worth to this kingdom many times over. I will not have her or her family harassed by those who cannot accept that true nobility may be found beyond bloodlines." As the court dispersed, murmuring in shocked tones, Duke Cedric guided Elswyth and Wulfric toward a side chamber. Once away from prying eyes, he knelt to address the boy directly. "That was bravely done, young Wulfric. You kept your composure when many grown men would have faltered." The boy straightened proudly. "I remembered what you told me, Your Grace. A page represents his knight in all things." "So he does." The Duke ruffled the boy's hair affectionately. "Now off with you to Sir Roderick. When he returns, tell him I wish to speak with him about sending pages on errands to ladies' chambers." When Wulfric had gone, Cedric turned to Elswyth. "They will not stop, you know. Today's defeat will only drive them to more subtle methods." "I know," she replied wearily. "Perhaps it would be easier if I stepped down, returned to—" "To what?" he interrupted. "Mending Lady Maudlin's gowns while children die of fevers that you could prevent? Hiding your knowledge because it makes others uncomfortable?" He shook his head firmly. "No, the kingdom needs you, Elswyth. I need you." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, laden with meaning beyond the words themselves. For months they had maintained a careful distance, the Duke and the herbalist, the nobleman and the common girl elevated by circumstance. But in private moments like this, something deeper flickered beneath the surface of their formal interactions. "The court will never accept a woman of my birth as anything more than a curiosity," she said softly. "A useful tool, perhaps, but never an equal." "Then the court must change," he replied with quiet intensity. "For too long, we have valued bloodlines over character, tradition over truth. What I learned in those months of wandering, what you showed me with that simple gift of bread, cannot be unlearned." He reached into his tunic and withdrew a small object, a silver medallion identical to the one the king had given her, fashioned in the shape of a wheat stalk. "I had this made after we returned from Hemmingford," he said, holding it out to her, "to remind myself that true nourishment, of body, of kingdom, of spirit, comes not from gold and jewels but from simple things freely given." Elswyth stared at the medallion, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You wear this?" "Close to my heart," he confirmed, "as a reminder of what kind of ruler I wish to become." From the corridor came the sound of approaching footsteps and voices. Their private moment would soon end, forced back into the rigid protocols of court life. But something had shifted between them, some barrier breached, some possibility acknowledged. "We should return," Elswyth said, stepping back. "There will be talk enough without us being found alone." Duke Cedric nodded, tucking the medallion back into his tunic. "Meet me in the eastern gardens at sunset. There is something I wish to show you, something that may make your position here more secure." That evening, as the winter sun cast long shadows across the frozen gardens, Elswyth wrapped herself in a woolen cloak and made her way to the appointed meeting place. The eastern gardens were seldom visited in winter, offering rare privacy within the bustling castle. She found the Duke waiting beside a stone bench cleared of snow. Beside him stood Master Thornley, the royal architect, clutching a roll of parchment. "Ah, Mistress Elswyth," the Duke greeted her. "Thank you for coming. Master Thornley has something to show us." The architect unrolled the parchment on the bench, revealing detailed drawings of a building with many windows and garden spaces. "What is this?" Elswyth asked, studying the plans. "Your healing house," Duke Cedric replied. "To be built in the spring, adjacent to the castle but accessible to all, noble and common alike." Elswyth's breath caught in her throat as she examined the drawings more closely. Rooms for treating patients, chambers for growing herbs indoors during winter, spaces for teaching and learning, all designed with careful attention to light and airflow. "This is extraordinary," she whispered. "The king has approved it," the Duke continued. "As royal herbalist, you will oversee its construction and operation. No longer will you need to work from that small chamber or beg permission to treat those in need." Master Thornley pointed to various features, explaining how they had incorporated elements from healing houses in distant lands. When he had finished, the Duke dismissed him with thanks, leaving Elswyth alone with the plans and her swirling thoughts. "Why?" she asked simply when the architect had gone. Duke Cedric's gaze was steady. "Because your knowledge should not die with you, as it nearly did with your mother. Because healing should not be hoarded by those who place pride above results. Because the kingdom needs this, a place where all may come for care regardless of birth or station." He paused, then added more softly, "And because you gave your last piece of bread to a stranger, expecting nothing in return. Such kindness deserves more than a medallion or a title. It deserves a legacy." The last light of day gilded his features, transforming the Duke into something almost mythical. Not the arrogant noble she had imagined in her former life, nor the broken beggar beneath the bridge, but something altogether different. A man trying to bridge worlds that had been separated for centuries. "The nobles will resist this too," she warned. "Let them." A smile touched his lips. "They resisted you, and yet here you stand, stronger for their opposition." As darkness fell over the garden, Elswyth rolled up the plans with careful hands. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new whispers, new attempts to undermine her position. But tonight, in this moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of possibility, not just for herself, but for all those who might follow in her footsteps. From a simple gift of bread had grown something far greater than she could have imagined. Not just her own transformation from seamstress to healer, but the slow, stubborn beginning of change within the kingdom itself. In the spring, when the healing house rose from frozen ground, the people would not see just stone and timber. They would see proof that kindness could transcend station, that knowledge could triumph over tradition, that the invisible could become not just visible, but vital. And perhaps in time, they would see what Duke Cedric had seen that day beneath the bridge. That true nobility lived not in bloodlines or titles, but in the simple courage to see hunger in another's eyes and offer what little one has to give. The first stars appeared overhead as they walked back toward the castle, their path lit by torches that turned the snow to gold. Behind them, the garden stood empty, waiting for spring and new beginnings. Before them, the castle windows glowed with warmth and light, beckoning them back to a world forever changed by a simple act of kindness. In castle halls and humble villages alike, the same truth echoes through centuries. True nobility isn't inherited with titles but earned through acts of courage and compassion. The story of Elswyth and Duke Cedric reminds us that even the smallest gesture of kindness, like sharing your last piece of bread, can transform not just individual lives, but entire kingdoms. Their tale lives on in tapestries that hang in Dornavale's great hall, showing not a woman in golden finery, but a simple herbalist with outstretched hands, sharing bread. When children ask about this woman, elders answer with reverence. She was the seamstress who mended a broken duke's heart and stitched the entire realm back together. In our realm of stories, we reveal how unexpected encounters between different worlds create the most powerful transformations. If this journey touched your heart, share it with others who might need reminding that worth isn't measured by birth but by the courage to give when giving seems impossible. Until our next medieval tale, remember that the truest crown is worn not upon the head but carried within the heart.